It should, yeah. If you even speak to from this distance, everybody can hear you loud and clear. Okay, welcome everyone to Autonomy now at Housmans Bookshop. Let me go through a couple of housekeeping details. The fire exit is out the way you came. Just run out there as fast as you can. The loos are our conveniences are very inconveniently behind there. So there's some steps on your right and you just got there. Other details, if you're not already in our email list, I would urge you to do so, because we will be having a whole series of events scheduled for at least the next year, so it would be certainly worth your while there. Any other details? At the end there's a couple of announcements about upcoming events that other groups are doing too. And let me just introduce you to Peter Marshall. Peter Marshall could do a far better job of introducing himself than I ever could. He's been in the scene for an awful long time. He's done this excellent book, which I think everybody know is highly recommended, Demanding the Impossible. He's done William Blake and a ton of other things. And Peter will talk about his new book about Bognor Boy, how he became an anarchist. And he'll also be talking about some future thoughts on anarchism as well. So please give it up for Peter.
Thank you. I've been asked to speak into this. Is it working? Can you hear at the back?
Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, I've done one talk already here, actually, some years ago. William Blake, who I see as a visionary anarchist. But today I'm here to talk about my latest book, which came out in November, called Bognor Boy, How I Became an Anarchist. And it's the first part of my memoirs, and it's from 1946, from 1970. So this is the first part. I believe Housmans was opened in 1 year before, 1945. Is that correct?
Sounds a bit right to me.
But I recently discovered it was 1 year for me, for my birth. And so I'm 72 at the moment, coming up to 73. So this is a memoir of my life from 1946 to 1970, and I plan to write the second part, which I'm already started. I've written altogether 17 books, quite a few about anarchism, but also other sorts of things, including books on ecology, one called Nature's Web, Exploration of Ecological Thinking. That America was called Rethinking Our Place on Earth. But I've also done something called Liberation Ecology, in which I developed my own version of what I call Liberation Ecology. And that's combining anarchism and ecology, which of course Murray Bookchin was quite famous for before his social ecology, before he eventually reverted in his old age back to Marxism. And actually, when he died, I think 2004, he was saying he was no longer an anarchist, but he obviously has done a lot about anarchism, in particular bringing together ecology and anarchism into social anarchism and ecology. Anyway, I'm talking tonight about my own memoir, which various people have kindly said it's a usually written memoir, and it's in particular it's about the generation of '68 and its legacy. And that it does talk about personal and social liberation at that period. I actually grew up in Bognor Regis on the south coast. I don't know if any of you know it, but it's meant to be the sunniest place in Britain. It doesn't always have these temperatures that we are suffering from tonight, or some is enjoying, or some is suffering. But it's always been a joke, Bognor Regis. It was when George V died. It was Regis because it's after the king. When George V died, because his doctor sent him down to Bognor to enjoy the ozone, or he hated it, and he said at the end of his life, last words say some different schools of historians. Some say "How goes the empire?" Others say "Bognor Bognor." anyway, I grew up there. Also greatly enjoyed by some of you old enough. No Steptoe on TV, but the dad liked Bognor. Whereas the son wanted to go to Saint Tropez. But it's been a joke really. But unfortunately, because of the advent of cheaper flights, that is now, like many seaside resorts in Britain, from my point of view, it's gone downhill. But and struggling to survive. But even the pier has been truncated off, falling in a storm into the sea. But my father was a Spitfire fighter pilot in the war, then became quite a famous, very famous racehorse trainer. He claimed he had the fastest horse on earth, over about 7 furlongs in Ascot. But my mother was a hairdresser. She liked to call herself a hair messer, and they broke up, understandably, when I was 2. So I grew up with my older brother and my mother, who was like an older sister in many ways, and also the grandparents, her parents, and they retired from having hotels in Bognor and the West End. A lovely place to grow up. I mean, not only I enjoyed the sun, which some said my cheery personality is partly a result of being a sunny place, but also that I loved the sea and the sands. From a very early age, I used to wonder what's on the other side of the horizon, and that led to much travelling later on in life. And I love the sea still. I have a small sailing boat, which is present in the Aegean, in Ionian, in Greece. But my mother, who, as I say, called herself a hairdresser, she actually very much taught me the importance of equality and justice. Just not only in the way she treated my brother and myself, but she always talked about equality. And whenever the monarchy came on TV, they had the TV to watch the coronation. She would say, "What difference are we to them? We have the same blood." And I've always believed that case myself. As justice, I suppose, is fair play and equal shares. But my uncle, who tried to be the authoritarian father figure, he taught me was a dislike of capitalism, because he would try and make a profit, the least work out of anything, including me and including his mother. And he actually was a failed accountant, and then a hotelier later on. But the worst thing for me really was being sent off to a boarding school because of my uncle. He thought I ought to have more, or Michael and I thought. He thought Michael and I should have more male presence. In fact, it turned out it was a single-sex boarding school, and run very much a school, Stunning Grammar School. It's very much run on the old 19th century model of public schools. The headmaster had been a colonist himself in what was called then the Gold Coast in Ghana, and he used to beat everybody at the first drop of a hat. And really, I experienced it at the boarding school where everybody could beat each other. The masters, the headmaster, the captains, the prefects, they could all beat you. And I had this experience of organised violence, and above all hierarchy and domination, which I think is that opposition to those things are the main, to me, the essence of anarchism. And so that experience helped me become an anarchist. And but unfortunately, I went on later. The great thing I did enjoy was believe it or not, was the Scouts, because even though they emphasised the importance of God, country, and Queen, they did actually allow us to have a certain amount of freedom on the Downs, in South Downs, Britain. We could even at age 13, we could just go off with a friend, camp for the weekend, and also in the after school we could always go out on Downs, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and it was a sort of sense of freedom and relaxation there, which I didn't get in the everyday schooling. After I then made a mistake, really, of becoming a purser cadet in the P&O Orient Company, partly because I met a chap, in fact, I used to call him Uncle Jim, but he was down the road where I lived, and he recommended becoming a purser cadet in the P&O, even though he himself had retired out of, and with an ulcer. But it did enable me to get away from the stifling provinciality of Bognor, where my uncle wanted me to become a so-called professional, like become a lawyer or a estate agent or God forbid, accountant. And I thought I'd go to sea. And but in some ways, this P&O Orient line, I did manage to go about the age of 18 around the world. But it was very much a continuation of the hierarchy, which I had experienced at school, particularly between the crew and the officers. I was a cadet officer, and but I did like seeing other ways of living than the countries. In particular, when I was in San Francisco in 66, I think, or 65, I saw the first sort of outbursts of hippiedom. The hippies were there, Haight-Ashbury, and I loved jazz also, by the way, which would seem to be an example of freedom to me. And I managed to see Thelonious Monk there, and went down to the City Lights Bookshop, which is like Housmans, which is a radical bookshop where the beat poets used to gather, and where they had their works published. And then eventually realizing that it was a pretty awful state to go around the world, round and round, carry on with the same hierarchical structure, same sort of colonial mentality, I decided actually, because by that time I'd met in Bognor a girl who had come from, who was originally from Martinique, and in the Caribbean Islands. Then grew up in Paris, in Fontainebleau. Then when she was about 11 or 12, she went out into Dakar, Senegal, West Africa. So I wrote to her, and I met her briefly for about 2 weeks. I wrote to her thinking I could get a job, perhaps, out in Dakar, Senegal. So I did manage to follow her brothers at a secondary school, teaching English, which I enjoyed. But then I've very much carried on my tradition of, already I've become a socialist. And I had a year, actually, just jumping a bit, I had a year training in London, and I used to find it very boring, so I tended to end up gambling with a friend, and then going to Hyde Park Corner. And I used to listen to the various arguments for socialism, for communism, and so on. And in particular, there was a chap called Soper, who turned out to be a baron and a lord, but he was socialist and a pacifist, and he used to stand on his soapbox and talk about both. And that I realised that socialism was really for me. So I went back. I went eventually, after a year going around the world, I thought there may be some sort of truth, some enlightenment to be had in universities. And I made a mistake for taking eventually 3 degrees, and I did realize it's not really, you can't really discover it in there. You can discover it for yourself anywhere. But nevertheless, I did it the hard way, and I didn't. At first, I did an external degree, London University in Kingston, in French, Spanish, and English. And during that period, I attended the Socialist Society and so on, and realised that I was definitely not a Leninist or even a Maoist, because I disagreed instinctively against the idea of dictatorship of the proletariat and the vanguard party, which they both preached. And I went to protests in London, some of the marches against Vietnam, against colonialism, and the magistrate, I thought, well, there must be something else than what seems to be on offer, the dictatorship and vanguard parties. And then I read, and this is where I became an anarchist, really. I read, when I was at Kingston, I read 3 books which had a seminal influence on me. One was about the Soul of Man and Socialism by Oscar Wilde, where he emphasizes, he thinks a socialist society most likely to allow individuality to flourish. And he said what the anarchists, I don't agree with the, in a note, he says, I don't really agree with this French outrages, propaganda by the deed, but he thought anarchism was closest to his creed, really. And then I read also a great pamphlet, I think, by Nicholas Wharton. I think he's been come here and given a talk. He's dead now, but he wrote a wonderful book, a pamphlet called About Anarchism, which has been reprinted with an introduction by his daughter, Natasha Walter. And so that was a great inspiration. Then I read to learn more about these things. I read George Woodcott's book on anarchism, which was then published by Penguin, Anarchism, A History of Libertarian Ideas and Movements. And so, having read all these things, I suddenly realised I'm an anarchist. And that was just not just a theoretical one. I was very inspired also by '68, the evenements, they call it evenements in French, but by the big student surge which threatened the state and government in May '68. I used to listen to the directly on the radio the young people being on the barricades were the same age as me, and so amongst whom there were many anarchists and situationists, and they call themselves the enragés. The situationists, and that's hence the title of my book. They said one of their slogans was "Be realistic, demand the impossible." So it sounds paradoxical, but nevertheless is a profound truth. They also said that it's forbidden to forbid, and they also call for imagination in power rather than the sort of dead hand of the state. But in fact, the long-term interest was decentralizing power, and as the anarchists have become so. And so when I was about in the '70s, when I realized an anarchist, I was doing some extramural work, teaching a course on anarchism and others for the London University part-time, while finishing a PhD on William Godwin, who some call the first anarchist thinker. I think probably the first self-conscious anarchist was Proudhon, in France, later in the 19th century. But he was the beginning of the 19th century, and his wife was actually his companion. He eventually married her, but although they both thought that marriage in those days was the most odious form of monopoly, but he lived with Mary Wollstonecraft, who was the first who wrote this book. It was the first, some called the first feminist, who wrote a vindication of the rights of woman, and their daughter was Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, with whom Shelley eloped, or she eloped with Shelley, when the poet, when she was 16. But in many ways, Shelley went on. The immortal author of this book, Political Justice, which Godwin had written, and had a very wide influence at the time. Before, very much part of the Enlightenment, but as he wrote that these radical ideas, and he as an anarchist thinker, saw the dangers of government and state. But they said that the notion of liberty fell in one common grave by 1800, and he went out to work in a juvenile library, which he set up, and wrote some other books, but and a famous novel called Caleb Williams. But lots of same happened with William Blake actually at the same time, because Blake's works are very much coded, and so some find his symbolism very difficult to understand. But so this confirmed my anarchism, really, reading about this, and I managed to get a book published on Godwin and his circle, which was published by Yale University Press. And I did a book about a collection of essays, because I've been linked with the Freedom Press, which is I think, the most thoughtful centre of anarchism in Britain at the time, and got friendly with Nicholas Water and Colin Ward and Vernon Richards, who was one involved particularly with the Freedom Press, and also George Woodcock, who then went to Canada, who wrote this book about the history of anarchism. But at one stage I was with David Goodway. I was thinking of we were asked to do a magazine, but we were not for Freedom Press journal, but we were not really prepared to just be propagandists, and so that didn't happen. But it's very interesting to see these three people there. I get to know them quite well, and also I wrote for Freedom Press and gave it them really the book on Blake, a short book on Blake, also a book about William Godwin's writings, and it was called The Anarchist Writings of William Godwin, but that's now been reproduced by PM Press in America, with a different title called Romantic Rationalist William Godwin Reader. Anyway, I think I've been involved with the Freedom Press, and I'm now a friend of Freedom Press. A few old cronies like myself are involved, including David Goodway, who's done various editions of anarchist writers. So I think I don't talk too much about myself, but I do recommend you reading my book, and it will explain to you more some of the things I mentioned already, in particular about anarchism towards the end of the book, really about anarchism, but also my voyage towards anarchism, from my experiences of my youth and of my childhood, and it explains, I hope, a certain amount. And plus they say critics have said it's a very beautiful memoir, and a great account of for my generation, and the importance of I have been called also in some of the critics have called me as an important radical historian and philosophical speculator. But that's for them to decide, and you. But I'd like to talk a little bit also about about anarchism, which is really this. After this book came out in '92, that I rewrote another for in 2007. I rewrote a very long epilogue, about 100 pages, trying to bring it up to date. Now it's been published. I rewrote part of it for the PM Press in 2010, and I don't think since then there's been a lot of important developments. I may be wrong. But the most important thing for me, is that there has been quite a important contribution by later the anarchists, some theorists and some practitioners, or both. In particular, there's been something called post-anarchist, or postmodernism anarchism, or post-left anarchism, and that in some ways they've taken up the postmodern critique of this 19th century, of the 18th century Enlightenment, and some have emphasized the importance of the not just the rational, but also the marvelous and the poetic and the magical. So you'll find that there are people like Hakim Bey. It's a pseudonym for a man called Wilson, but he's written about the importance of ontological anarchy and poetic terrorism. But he's most famous for TAZ, which is a temporary autonomous zone. So he, like Colin Ward in this country, he felt that the idea of a social revolution was unlikely given the situation, but he never thought that people could here and now create zones of freedom for themselves. Whether it's all sorts, whether it's in anarcho-syndicalism or a rave, that some people could actually create zones of freedom and equality, in which they may have to carry on, and creativity, but while they existed, they opposed the state and the government, but they also were temporary zones. So he wrote about ontological anarchism, very strongly criticised by Murray Bookchin, who developed something called social ecology. I may be talking about things you already know, but he wrote an essay thinking there's an unbridgeable gulf between lifestyle anarchism and social ecology, also even social anarchism, which he espoused himself. But there's been very other important developments of green anarchists. He's quite combined the ecological with the anarchical, particularly social anarchism, and that they would say the importance of I have tried to show in Nature's Web and in Riding the Wind, that the importance that we're destroying the planet, and that we should try and create a society where we are more mindful, great awareness of what we're doing to nature and to other beings, including animals and even anything which lives, which as Blake once said, that everything lives is holy. View I share, but also the social ecology of Bookchin, who does try and combine social anarchism and a wider view of an ecology. But he later on, as I said, not only didn't call himself an anarchist, but he very much emphasized the importance of libertarian municipalism. And so in other words, like, he was inspired by the town meetings of in America. And he in particular was concerned about people voting locally and even a majority rule, which other anarchists would reject, not in favouring consensus, as I do. And they would rather not be governed by majority rule. I've seen it at work. In fact, I was involved with the Commune in the 70s, one of the founding members, and we actually chose to proceed by consensus in an open meeting for all to attend, including children, and that's still alive. So, normally I think intentional communities only last about 3 years, but they're still alive 50 years later, and still working. and they used to produce a book called Communal Living in Britain. But I went up to North Wales later, and in a remote cottage, not in Sardinia. That's where I wrote Demanding Possible, and was very much impressed by the developing feminist, green, and peace movements, and their ideas about authoritarian relationships and domination and hierarchy, which I think has come through to modern anarchism. The so-called modern anarchists and the post-left anarchists have been very concerned about those aspects. But just briefly, before I ask any questions, that because I've been asked not to talk for 40 minutes, that I perhaps give you. I think it's been a very important development in other movements which are not necessarily anarchistic or anarchist in a self-conscious sense. But they are anarchistic, like the Zapatas in Mexico, Zapatistas, and who tried to work through consensus. And there's a chap called Marcos who claims he's not a leader, but in many ways he is. But they do actually strive to decide through British councils and communities by consensus. There's also something very important, I think, called Rojava, which is in North Syria by the Kurds, who believe in what's called confederal municipalism. So they have local communities in which they decide together, and then they confederate with other villages or other town communities to try and get a policy for all. And they were obviously under stress both by Syrians, Russians, the mainstream government Syrians, authoritarian Syrians who are supported by Russia, also by Turkey, who has invaded them. So they're squeezed out a bit, but they're still very important from America's point of view. And even things like the Post-Gasolina in New Orleans. I have a friend called John Clark who's been very much involved with that, another fellow anarchist. And he, I think also the even Rebellion Extinction, which has certain elements of an anarchistic way of behaving, direct action, and maybe some sort of sabotage, but in favour of so many animals which are disappearing on the Earth's surface. So these important developments, I just touch upon them, but what I was actually finally say is that I'm in favour of what they call anarchism without adjectives. And that was, I think, developed by a man called Malatesta and Voltairine, the woman called Voltairine de Cleyre. They thought that it's important, like in more recent times, Colin Ward, that it's important to have trying to develop a anarchist society, which, that is to say, a society without hierarchy and authority, oppression, and not a society of equals between women and men, and trying to do it here and now, just in our relationships, and not necessarily wait for some social revolution in the future which may never come, but we can do something here and now. And I think I would say I'm an anarchist without adjectives, since I'm not. One of the things I try to bring out in the Demanding Possible, History of Anarchism, is that anarchism is very much like a river with many tributaries, many currents, but it still rolls to the great ocean of freedom and equality. And anarchists against the capital and the state. And I didn't really mention that all the importance of the anti-globalization movement, and who also proceed by consensus as much as possible, horizontal networks rather than vertical ones, and so I always say one could be both an individualist in one personal relationships, but also can support the anarcho-syndicalism, which is a form of trade unionism, in which they want workers' control and also egalitarian relationships. And they believe that what the society they create, I also believe that the society that they create does an example of how future society can be. So it's very important what you're doing at the moment, I think, here and now. And the other aspect is that you can be an individualist, you can be a syndicalist, you can also support your trade unions. Equally, you can be I would take a view of social anarchism, or anarcho-communism, or anarcho-feminism, but it's something which can widen society, in which people, as I say, don't live necessarily with authority and hierarchy, and they can, and oppression, they can try and live a more egalitarian and a just life. So just finally, I would say that it's very important to get these things and become in harmony with nature. It doesn't really matter whether you live in the countryside or the city. We can all work towards a better world as possible, in which these things don't happen. But unfortunately, the terrible things which are going on, particularly to the planet and to other people. People live in are living now, I think, or some people are, this sort of collective hallucination that people believing that somehow having more property, having more material goods, consumer goods, somehow that would make them happier. But unfortunately, I don't think it does. It's not the case. And so in a way, they're so manipulated. We have a situation of the society of the spectacle, which situations taught about, that we live in a society where everything is media controlled, the fashion and so on. But then also it's even worse in a way, or just as bad, is we're also living in a society of surveillance. But with the big corporations, and governments, they follow. They can follow everything you do, and so that anything which diminishes surveillance and spectacle is I think is worth striving for. And I hope Housmans will carry on this fine tradition of protesting and having books which actually try and wear conscience, trying to raise consciousness about these issues and oppose the state and the government. And we don't need more. If you change prime ministers, like changing people on Titanic, that is doomed, And so anarchists always said, why apart from a local election, why bother to vote? Because they will get it. There's always get these corrupt politicians, power-hungry politicians in, and there may be a slight difference between, different parties, but they are still parties. They're still. And although I've historically supported Labour versus the Tories, there's still not much difference in a way when they get into power, as we all know with Blair and so on. But anyway, I want to I want to finally say that I would advocate anarchism without adjectives, and in which people are more just, egalitarian, and closer in harmony with nature. So, thank you very much for listening and coming along. And I just add that this book is is worth looking at, I think, about how I became an anarchist, but also how my experiences made me an anarchist. But I've been an anarchist at least for 50 years, and so I don't plan to change now.
Well, thank
pass
you.
on the baton to others.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. I mean, it's also worth mentioning about Housmans Bookshop. I mean, the story of Housmans was after World War II, a local widow bequeathed her will to a local Anglican vicar. And the Anglican vicar was very embarrassed to be given this money. And so he did some research and said, I've got to put it into good cause. And he eventually concluded, well, it's got to go to the peace movement because we've just had 2 world wars. And if it wasn't for that widow, and if it wasn't for that vicar making those decisions, this shop wouldn't be here today. And now that might sound quite petty, but it's when I first came to London over 34 years ago, there was at least, I think it's 32 radical bookshops that I can recall. And those things all had a profound effect on everybody, you know. And so I think it's worthwhile to actually just think that even just 2 people made a difference in the culture of the UK. Upstairs, when London Lesbian and Gay Switchboard didn't have any money and no financial supporters, upstairs was actually where they held their telephone lines. And then when the AIDS crisis occurred, that's where the original AIDS advice came from in the UK before there was any money coming from anybody in the UK. And eventually when the government decided to fork out some cash, they got their own premises and what have you. Upstairs it's got things like the War Resisters International, Peace News was up there, and a whole pile of radical things just started in this place alone that just became, that may have sounded batty originally at the time to some, but are now a key part of activism today. So things can actually have a difference. And I just want to thank Peter Marshall again, giving a quick scan of other forms of anarchism, because I think it's worthwhile. They all got a name check. Does anybody have any particular questions or what have you? I know you're all probably heat-stroked out and what have you.
Anyone wants to ask a question, please do. We're all here together. And
Yes, just an observation.
Yes.
Please use mic.
Sorry.
Please use microphone. Sorry, it's already on. Yeah, just an observation when you mentioned in connection with Malatesta's idea of a generalised anarchism diffused by individual behaviour.
Yeah.
It's very much in line with famous Gandhi's old dictum, be the change that you want to see. That's what I've tried to be, failing probably at every turn, but in one's own just personal relations and widening out from that. Just bear in mind that sense of equality of esteem among the people you, until they show maybe they don't deserve it, or they've got more than you. So just that.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Do you want me to reply to that? Or? No.
If you want.
Did you hear any anarchist speakers corner, or was it just the socialist?
So I can't hear very well. Can you?
Did you hear any anarchists speak at Speakers Corner, Hyde Park, or was it only the socialists?
Actually, at the time, in the 66, I think, 65, at the time I didn't hear anarchism spoken there. I think there was an anarchist speaker, but I tend to go around, quite eclectic, listening to what different people's said. But I remember the Communist Party was about strong there. There were quite a few socialists, but I think anarchism. I think there was a speaker, but I didn't come across them, and so therefore my experience of the school and emotionally led me to believe that anarchism was a way forward and not vanguard parties which I think often, and so-called dictatorship of proletariat. I think often, as we see in the Soviet Union, you get a military dictatorship. You don't get dictatorship of a state and even of one party. And even though the long-term claim, like Lenin claimed about the withering away of the state, in fact the state got much stronger, and it's partly through the so-called Velvet Revolutions that the Soviet Union eventually broke up. It may also have been because they were trying to compete with America for the space race and so on. But yes, I think I just it was mainly socialists. But they were libertarian socialists. So some say libertarian socialism is close to anarchism, but others don't. But someone like Chomsky, who's written on anarchism, he really claims he's libertarian socialism. His father was very much an anarcho-syndicalist, part of the Wobblies, America. But that I didn't actually hear anarchism being spoken directly. I had to go discover it myself.
Well, can I just, were there any particular, apart from Voltaire de Cleyre and Malatesta, was there any who are both absolutely critical, people in anarchism? Were there any other anarchists that particularly pressed your buttons?
Press my button?
Yes.
Yes. I did actually say that's very important for me was Nicholas Walter, his pamphlet about anarchism, and that was a very seminal work for me. Also Oscar Wilde, and they're getting to know more about anarchism by reading George Woodcock. Do you know what? These people have just... If it wasn't for my friend John Angus in the audience, who actually drummed it home to me about how important these people were, yeah.
I would not have actually paid that. I have to be honest, I would not have paid the same attention to them if it wasn't for him. And I think it's an entire new generation that don't really know about the influence these people have actually had in anarchism overall.
Yeah,
I'd love to champion them again.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'm lucky enough to... My book on the history of anarchism does seem to be selling well even now, and obviously has some critics, but generally speaking, it's being sold well. And that I think it's worth reading Oscar Wilde, sort of man under socialism, and how he talks the importance of individuality, which can be lost, in this sort of barrel organ of authoritarian socialism. And and how important it is to a creative life. I think most modern anarchists, including myself, would say we should try and develop a society which has the greatest individuality and the greatest social solidarity. Can be called communal individuality. But the two aspects which we see also actually in Kropotkin also was a great influence on me. And he talks about and so does Emma Goldman, talk about the importance of the individual and society. We're social beings, but it's important to be realize in an anarchist society is more likely we can develop the full potential of our being, which I think is true.
Anyone got any particular thoughts, questions, what have you?
I thought that was a very interesting talk. Really quick question. You talk about anarchism without adjectives.
Yes.
Could you just elaborate a bit further than that? Because to me, it encapsulates things like left, collective, all these sort of words that come into my head when I think about anarchism.
Well, I would just say that it's important to be anarchism without adjectives. Is recognising that there's not an unbridgeable gulf between the so-called lifestyle anarchists and social anarchists. That we're all anarchists in different ways, and we're also you can be a lifestyle anarchist in just your everyday life, but at the same time you can be an anarcho-syndicalist, be a social anarchist, you can be an ecologist. It's not exclusive, I don't think, and so I think anything which opposes hierarchy and authority, they're a good thing. But in personal relationships, but also with a wider sphere of society.
I have to say that one of the things that does break my heart is anarchist sectarianism.
Yes, exactly, yes.
I think that's the most destructive thing we've got, and I think it's damaged anarchism no end for generations. So I think your take about approaching anarchism without adjectives is very useful.
Yes, so I agree with that. And I think we'll see them as part of these currents, in the Great River, towards of anarchy. And it's a great shame that there are sectarian differences between certain groups, for me, and also other countries. So people just whereas anarchism is probably the most radical source of energy for the new movements, but from Occupy to Rojava, that they're not necessarily aware of the tradition or the history, they're acting in a very anarchistic way. You know? And that's something that Collingwood talked about in many different books, whether about town planning or allotments or squatting, that people were quite anarchistic. And when it's believed to be, do it yourself, think, as soon as you start thinking for yourself and acting for yourself, you're beginning to be an anarchist. And I think it's a great shame that people waste their energy are being so sectarian.
Just one point that Peter brought up earlier about William Godwin. He's done a couple of books on William Godwin, they're worth checking out. William Godwin and his wife Mary Shelley, and his daughter Mary Shelley, and William Godwin's wife Mary Wollstonecraft only lived a few blocks away from here. And most, it's amazing how many people don't realise that. So I would love it if you come back and maybe could get some people to talk about William Godwin along with you,
Yes,
because I think it's worthwhile actually locating anarchists in space and time, because I think then it gives you a different conception about what they are. And I really think that William Godwin has dropped off. Another person who's dropped off the radar. And another thing I'd love to pick up on is that every generation of anarchists thinks they're the most fierce thing that's ever occurred. But if you look at, say, certain things that have occurred in the past, I mean, okay, all these, assassinations and what have you. But in British anarchism, the pacifist anarchism was really courageous stuff they did in the past. That, an awful lot of eye-boggling stuff that people have not. What I want to do is get those older anarchists in, if they're still, about, and to actually talk about what the stuff that they did in the past, because some of the things they did would put their eyes in stocks. They had courage in a way that an awful lot of people just don't have. And I'd just love it to bring that to a new generation and just show what they've actually done with very little.
Yes, I mean, it's a great shame in a way, I think, that Vernon Richards he had Freedom Press for a long time. Yeah. He produced a wonderful book, a journal called Spain and the World, then morphed into the Freedom. But then some people like, he's gone, and people like in Britain, this is Colin Ward, which I knew quite well. He's also gone. He written wonderfully about anarchy in action, and a small book about a short introduction to anarchism. Then also Nicholas Waters died. And so these people have died off, these old comrades, if you like. And I probably survived from that era. And so does David Goodway. But there are not many of us left. Some of you are also perhaps remember these situations and post-war in the 60s and so on. But there's been a big schism in class war anarchists and more thoughtful anarchists between Albert Schweitzer, not Schweitzer, Albert. Sorry?
Albert Reynolds?
No, Albert Black Flame.
Albert
Meltzer. I said Schweitzer Meltzer, and he very much is in the centre of anarchism, but plus Freedom Press. But they're absurdly opposed to each other. One was emphasising the importance of class war, and the other was saying, well, they're just radical intellectuals. So you see the same sort of thing with the modern anarchism with a chap called Ian Bone, and so I think, from my point of view, it's a shame people are so interested in one particular strand, not seeing a wider picture.
There's also something else worth mentioning, is that there's a couple of really fantastic anarchist feminists who are doing some great work of unearthing women that have just dropped off the radar. Kathy Ferguson is one. If you check, she's at University of Hawaii. If you check her site, she's got a fantastic list of women that have done in the anarchist tradition, have done some fantastic stuff. And there's also great stuff about anarchism from, say, 100 years ago at different parts of the world. Like there's a youngish chap called Ole Burke Lawson, who's championing MPT Atacharya, who he's good and Ole's just going around the world, check him wherever Lawson was doing, where Atacharya was doing his being a discussant with, and he's uncovering archives of all of Atacharya's work everywhere. So I mean, and I think I'm very hopeful that now with it, one of the good things about digitisation is I think we're going to uncover an awful lot of anarchists from across the world who have been forgotten because of the wave of, like the generations of people had with communism and globalisation and what have you. So I think in the next few years we're going to have an entirely different perspective on what anarchism is. And I think with, let's just bracket it as third world anarchism. I think first world anarchism is going to get heavily informed as those archives are uncovered, and I think it's going to be very rich.
Yes.
We're going to have rich pickings for us in the future.
So it's a very rich tradition, and it's been the Marxists have said, or it's particularly people like historians like Eric Hobsbawm, they dismissed it as being just an imaginative idea of adolescence. But in fact, there's a very, very serious body of work. In my book, History of Anarchism, I actually traced these, what they call anarchist sensibility, been always with us ever since the hunter-gatherers. But as I said, the first self-conscious anarchist, the man who called himself an anarchist, was Proudhon, which was late 9th century, or middle of 9th century, a bit later. And but in Paris Commune and in many, particularly in Spain, the Spanish Civil War, many self-conscious anarchists were involved, and that unfortunately Woodcock said, well, it's died as a movement, and it's just purely as an idea. When he first wrote this book about anarchism, then he was forced in 1975, to say actually he was wrong. There's been a huge upsurge, particularly amongst young, about anarchism. And I would say since the millennium, it's probably the centre of radical energy. People now are looking to anarchism in a way they never did before, because of the historic failure of this authoritarian communism. Some would call it red fascism, and they were looking for an alternative. It's a very rich and a very complex and a very important body of ideas and movements. And sensibility of anarchistic sensibility has been with us ever since hunter-gatherers. Whenever people have tried to live more cooperative and a more egalitarian and a more peaceful way of being, it's been with us.
And there's also something else, just to telegraph something that's going to, in October we're going to be having Martin Wright and another couple of speakers here talking about Louise Michel. Now if you haven't heard of Louise Michel, she was an absolute legend in the Paris Commune, and he's going to be bringing out new research that hasn't come out anywhere else before, and we've got a couple of books on her here, and we'll have them there in the night so you can get a better idea of her. But I mean, the tradition is just so amazingly rich. This is the thing about it. So I'm personally quite happy reading, Marx or anybody else, but as far as I'm concerned, I find anarchism the most useful. But I would urge people to draw from any other tradition as well. Does anybody else have any other questions or thoughts or what have you? Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand there. Beg your pardon.
Just two responses leading to a question to you personally, Peter. The without adjectives issue, it occurred to me in conversation actually with Michael. I remember where it was actually in Gower Street a few years back. I've not seen anybody remark upon this anywhere, but it suddenly hit me that it's no exaggeration to say that the spectrum of tendencies describing themselves as anarchists is wider than any other political spectrum. I mean, it even extends, I discovered a few years back to my astonishment, thanks to Wikipedia, to fascists who are, I mean, they sort of have as far as I can see, a fanciful image of England, for example, reverting back to there will be a government, not a government, but Wessex, for example, will administer itself. I mean, they seem to be racist, but nonetheless, they call themselves anarchists. Now, the question arises there, one extremity, are they to be accepted or not? But my point is that I think it says something about what John Pilgrim, I think is still around, who used to contribute to anarchy from time to time, Colin Ward's day, he defined anarchism as opposite, which, I mean, there are multiple definitions, but it's the one that when I heard it, I committed to memory, that anarchism is opposition to the authority principle in the conduct of human relationships. Now, the question of Speaker's Corner, in fact, there were, over the decades, some of the best speakers at Speaker's Corner were in fact anarchists. Most notably, I only heard him a few times in my late teens, Philip Sansom, who was an illustrator. He was one of the editors of Freedom, who in 1945 was jailed as a result of the incitement to disaffection Old Bailey trial that resulted in the Freedom Defence Committee, which Orwell, for example, was a member. There was also there were people. Well, I should mention, it's worth checking out if you're into Speaker's Corner. The late Heathcote Williams's first book, written when he was about 24, it was a result of very detailed research and living with down and outs and whatnot, and living with speakers. It's actually called The Speakers. You can find it on eBay, and it was regarded by some, including Harold Pinter, as in effect a work of genius, and why Pinter took him up when he was... there's also Tony Allen, the anarchist stand-up comedian. He did more recently a history of Speaker's Corner. He used to speak there frequently. There was somebody who was very influential. He changed my life completely. We never spoke at Speaker's Corner, but he was there every Sunday for years, and that was Alfred Reynolds, who used to have a discussion group that would meet at various places where he moved, but not many people, about 10 people attend. But amongst those who attended before, I only went to about half a dozen meetings over as many years in my teams, but Nicholas Walter used to go there, and Colin Wilson was an early devotee who told me, he's never said this in print, but he told me before he died that he'd written The Outsider as a riposte to Alfred's essay, Pilot's Question. Now, I was given that essay by an English master, and up to that point, I thought anybody who's reluctant to join the cadet corps was the next best thing to a traitor. Hanging was a good thing. This was about 1962, when the question was, should hanging be abolished or not? And over a period of about a year, I concluded that Alfred never called himself an anarchist as such, but he clearly was. I realized that I was an anarchist. Had that not happened, then my life would have been completely different. I would have ended up, I think, maybe as some sort of sub Jeffrey Archer character. But I was wondering, if it's not too invidious, the question, Peter, had you not become, arrived at the position where you conclude you were some sort of anarchist, how might your life otherwise have been? Or is that a question that's irrelevant as far as you're concerned?
I can't really say, but I do recognise the importance of people like Donald Room and who became a cartoonist and editor of Freedom. He did a series he was called The Wildcat, and also I think there was a man called Guy Aldred in the First World War. I think he used to speak on the soapbox in Glasgow, if I'm not right. I've read some of his writings, but I'm sure there was a very important oral tradition. But unfortunately, I wasn't in touch until later, and so my first fight, I suppose, a fiscal anarchist, in the sense that I realised that the hierarchy, capital, corporal punishment, authority was wrong. They were wrong, but that was something which came to my experience at boarding school, and later on in the Merchant Navy. But I had nevertheless been influenced by a chap called Soper. He was a socialist, and it's called Donald Soper. Yeah, he was actually a baron also, and an Anglican, not Anglican, a dissenting minister, Methodist, minister.
Do you know, this wasn't Lord Soper in one of your programmes in After Dark once?
He may well have been. Soper was a fairly conventional socialist. Fairly conventional socialist.
Yes.
Apart from being a Methodist, but he was I suppose one of the most powerful regular speakers for years.
Yes.
Not just at Speaker's Corner, but at Tower Hill, where I think that tradition is long ended.
Yes.
I forgot to mention, by the way, Peter, that I discovered, thanks to Colin Wilson, who wrote a 12-page profile of Alfred Reynolds in Encounter some years later, that Alfred, in my case, appropriately enough, he'd been involved in the denazification of the Hitler Youth. He was Hungarian.
Who had been? Who?
Alfred Reynolds,
His
who had
Lou,
influenced people like Nick Walter and Colin Wilson and a few others, you know, that the origin of what something, a group called the Bridge Circle, and they published a duplicated newsletter about 4 times a year called the London Letter. It's called the Bridge Circle, and nothing to do with playing cards. It came into existence because various people who'd been involved with denazification of the Hitler Youth decided that there was some in Scandinavia, Germany, and Alfred had come here and was working, I think, quite a senior position in the Ministry of Pensions, that it was necessary to do all they could to prevent something like the Second World War happening again, and therefore it was necessary to try and create a bridge, or bridges, that's hence the name Bridge Circle, between people of different religions, different political persuasions, different nationalities. Anyway, I thought, because I thought the League of Empire Loyalists, to me, in my ignorance, I used to read the Daily Express like Holy Writ, you know. I mean, well, I used to believe what it said in the reader columns. But I believed at that time, when I was about 12, the League of Empire Loyalists sounded like a pretty good organisation, even though they were neo-fascists. So when I discovered that Alfred and the whole Bridge Circle thing had its origins in the denazification of the Hitler Youth, oh, blimey, that's pretty appropriate in my case.
Yes, I understand that. My uncle was actually quite sympathetic to the Mosleyites for the war, and they were neo-fascists. And I also want to mention Heathcote Williams, who was sometimes called anarchist poet, and he just recently, well, sometime he died. But he is advancing in his work that definitely has an anarchist sensibility.
Oh yeah, that's.
Sorry?
Yeah. Hesketh, who was one of my oldest and one of my closest friends, in fact, was very much an anarchist. Although this was not explicit or apparent in the early part of his career, it became more so when, in my view, in his later years, he lost his mojo writing wise, but it became much more explicit, and he really became paradoxically more militant, at least in the expression of his views, and therefore, you know, his first volume about it's called The Speakers, which is a work of it's a documentary account of individuals like Axel Nay Hock, Axel was regarded as an anarchist. You know, he would attend the meetings at Lamb and Flag and whatnot. So, and he's one of the major figures. In The Speakers, that volume that you can pick up fairly cheap if you're lucky, the paperback. It's reprinted a few times, but on eBay. So it's not just about Speaker's Corner, but also includes quite a feeling of what the anarchist sensibility was in the early 60s.
Yeah, I think it's quite prevalent then.
Right, now, unless anybody's, and I don't know about anybody else, but I'm starting to fade out. Has anybody got any final questions, final points, or what have you? Got any final points, Peter?
Well, I would just say thank you very much for having me here. That I think it's worth reading Bognor Boy, having spent some time writing it. It does give advancing, I think, idea of a history of that period from 1945 onwards, which you talked about in the 60s, and also very much how the 60s was very important to that period. We did think that the social revolution was around the corner, that we could definitely change society for the better. And although later on in the 70s and 80s, with Thatcherism coming to power, Reagan, although they talked about getting back the frontiers of the state, in fact, that it got stronger in that period. And now terrible men like Trump and so on, now it's Boris Johnson, who's a friend of Trump, it seems, that they just want to turn this society into a market economy, neoliberalism, and they want to make the state stronger by having more police, more army, and so on. So it's a great tragedy that a lot of these people in power have not been held to account, and they have, it seems that social control has increased in my life. I would say all the more reason to challenge it by protesting, by direct action, and to try and create a society for if it's not too late, which is more in harmony with nature and more concerned about. There has been a certain increase in the awareness of what we're doing to animals and to plants, but we can still carry on. And as it's been pointed out to me, that really the so-called party in the West of consumerism wants now to be exported to India and to China. In fact, that's not possible because it would require at least four planets to provide the resources. So we have to readjust our way of life, I think, before it's too late, if there's any hope for the world to continue. And we hear about climate change and how climate global heating, as I call it, today is one example, in a way. Which I do therefore appreciate the fact that you turned up, and despite the weather, and I hope it's been slightly enlightening, and I've enjoyed being here.
Lovely stuff. Just a couple of quick announcements. First of all, on the 3rd of August, Tommy Robertson's going to be released from prison. So Anti-Fascist Assembly are going to be organising against it. So please check the Anti-Fascist Assembly website. Our next scheduled talk is going to be on the last. We're going to have a quiet period in August unless we're able to get certain find any academics, and then we might do something last minute. So please put your name. If your name isn't on our email list already, put it on, because if we've got any last minute talks, they might be fast turnaround, and it could be just a matter of days between us finding somebody and the event occurring. Now, what else is actually occurring? It's also worth keeping an eye on the Industrial Workers of the World website, IWW London, because they've been doing some fantastic actions recently against Uber, Deliveroo and some other things, and have done some fantastic work in London about the dark kitchens problem. If you want to hear more about dark kitchens problem, I can tell you about that later. Make it somebody from IWW to do a talk on it as well. I'm glad John Angus mentioned about the problem of national anarchism. We should do something in that as well in the future. So if anybody knows any specialists on that aspect in academia, what have you, do get in touch with me, because we have to examine the problem. And I'm going to say thank you very much to Peter, but if you can let me, feel free to hang about, what have you. We always stop Peter's work in here, so if you don't get anything tonight, there will be stuff in the future. Just give me enough room to move all the chairs out of the way and all the rest if you feel to talk. Help yourself to water, what have you. And again, thanks very much to Peter. It's really grateful.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm from Devon, and on this particularly hot night, sweltering night, but it's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Stuff. And don't forget, his first part of his autobiography is Bognor Boy, and we're selling it here for £10. And £10 for a paperback is very good value for money. So again, don't forget to put your name in the email list. And thanks again.
Thank you for coming.
Bognor Boy up here? Oh, yeah.